Tony Ferguson, after 5 consecutive losses, returns back to the octagon at UFC 291, which will take place in Salt Lake City. His opponent will also be UFC veteran Bobby Green. Tony was last scheduled to fight at welterweight against Li Jingliang, but fought Nate Diaz, where he lost by submission in the 4th round. Will he be able to get back on the winning track? Hello friends, it's World of MMA. In today's video I will give a prediction for the lightweight fight between Tony Ferguson and Bobby Green. But before you start this video, don't forget to subscribe and like. Let's go! For many years Tony Ferguson was considered the main force in the lightweight division, capable of defeating undefeated Russian Khabib Nurmagomedov. However, the fight, which for various reasons was disrupted 5 times, was never meant to take place. In May 2020, Ferguson, who was on a magnificent streak of 12 consecutive victories, lost in a fight for the interim belt Gaethje, and after that his career clearly went downhill. After the fight with Justin, Ferguson spent like a carbon copy, lying on his back for all 3 rounds, first under Charles Oliveira and then under Beneil Dariush. Victory over a once formidable opponent with a big name allowed these fighters to move up in the rankings. But Tony was no longer like his old self. Tony then lost by hard knockout to Michael Chandler and by choke to Nate Diaz. Ferguson himself explains the latest failures, then lack of involvement in the training process, then injuries, then unnecessary people around. But the reason here is most likely one: age. Still, 39 years old for the lightweight category is quite a lot, especially considering the damage that El Chuchi took even in winning fights. Bobby, the King, Green is a 36-year-old fighter from the United States. He is now a veteran of the UFC and Strikeforce. But Bobby didn't start his MMA journey so successfully and was signed to Strikeforce with a 15-4 record. After losing his debut fight to Scott Coker's promotion, the American won 8 fights in a row, including 4 fights already under the auspices of the UFC. The 8th win was over the famous Josh Thompson, and Green got the right to fight Edson Barboza, but he lost to the Brazilian, and the black streak began. In 7 fights, including the fight with Barboza, there was only 1 victory and 1 more fight ended in a draw. Yes, the opponents were Sirius Poirier, Trinaldo, Vannata and the same Barboza. That said, only Dustin Poirier was able to finish Green. But in the summer of 2020 Bobby returned and scored 3 wins over Clay Guida, in a rematch with Lando Vannata and over Alan Patrick. However, the streak was interrupted by a loss to Thiago Moises. In the summer of 2021, Bobby and Rafael Fiziev put on a real show, but the Kyrgyz national won. A few months later, Green earned his first early victory since 2013, knocking out Al Iaquinta in magnificent style. The King didn't stop there and outright ran over prospect Nazat Haqparast. However, then alternated between 2 consecutive defeats. First, he lost to Islam Makhachev, where he came out on short notice replacing Beneil Dariush, who came off the fight. Then he lost by TKO to Drew Dober. In his last fight with Jared Gordon, the fight was ruled a no contest due to a head clash. Moving on to the wrestling base, and first up is Tony Ferguson. Tony was never really known for his wrestling, maybe his jiu-jitsu, but certainly not with his takedowns and control. But a lot of people would say he's won a lot of submissions. But there's a logical explanation for that. Tony liked to use this kind of tricks when the opponent was pretty tired and already at his feet, and for those moments Ferguson was closing darts and similar techniques. As for the wrestling itself, it got worse. He was being moved and fought by almost every fighter that Tony faced. Absolutely everyone put him down and wouldn't let him get up until the end of the round. And if they would have given him freestyles in the beginning of his career, maybe he would not have reached at least the interim champion status. Now on to the wrestling aspect of Bobby Green. As for his wrestling, I haven't seen Green use it at all lately. His opponents were mostly one-sided punchers, who had nothing to do with wrestling. The maximum he's had is Islam Makhachev, who took him on without any trouble and scored him in a tough manner. He hasn't shown us his wrestling skills for a long time, and I don't think we'll need them in this fight. So what's the result? I think Tony is the favorite, because he's had a lot of submissions in the past. Let's start as usual with the punching, and first up is pure boxing representative Bobby Green. The king of knockouts is a master of his craft. Even though the peak of his career is long gone, but that hasn't made his performance any worse. He continues to show a hand-to-hand shootout, where for the most part he comes out a winner. A prime example is the fight against Rafael Fiziev, who is a young prospect in this division and ranks high in the rankings. Now he is being given another chance, a win over which will add to Green's high-profile recognition. Now moving on to Tony Ferguson's striking skills, and there is no trace of Tony who showed real fire in the octagon. Watch his last few fights and you'll see what I'm talking about. Elbows, blood all over the octagon, opponents are running away from him, and Tony is running to finish his opponent. But now it's colossally the opposite. He manages to get outboxed by Nate Diaz, who at one time would have lost to Tony with a 100% chance. I think everyone remembers how Tony got knocked out from the front by kick. He was already psychologically scarred after the fight with Gaethje. But what happened to him after the Chandler fight? As you remember that fight, he started out pretty good, sending Chandler to the canvas. But afterwards, he took his revenge with a harder punch to the face, and what's the bottom line? I don't believe Ferguson can compete with Green on his hands. So he is the favorite in this aspect. Let's move on to the cardio athletes, and as we already know, the fight will be 3 rounds and Green has never had a problem at this distance. He can go the whole 15 minutes at a very high tempo, and I think it's a very small percentage that he gets tired. I think the fight with Fiziev is a good example for you. As for Tony, I have nothing but praise for him here as well. His last fight was a full 25 minutes, which means Ferguson is not overpowered, and that's why I'm going to have to pick Tony as a favorite this time. In terms of experience, I'm going to go with Tony, who has been in a lot of fights with the top men in the division, and I think that will play a big part in his fight with Bobby. I think Bobby Green is going to win this fight by decision. Ferguson is on the decline, so Green will be able to find the gaps in El Chuchui's game. What do you think, friends? Write your opinions in the comments. Bye, everybody.